Ash sifted down through the broken ribs of the throne room like winter's first snow, soft and without pity. The fires below had found their easy food among the smashed tapestries and splintered benches, and the heat came up the cracks of the floor stones, a low, resentful breathing. The Iron Throne itself had warped into a jagged thing, black at the edges where flame had kissed it and left a soot-lover's bloom. A sword's quillin drooped like a weeping branch. Even the light that made it through the caved roof seemed tired, a dull pewter smear rather than the bright gold of morning. Ghost pressed his shoulder to Jon's thigh and lifted his narrow head, eyes red as banked embers. His breath fogged in the coolness of the room. He did not whine. He did not need to. Jon heard Ghost without sound, the prickling attention, the readiness, the wordless way a dire wolf considered a shape and tested it for threat. They had come to this room together once before, in dreams that stopped being only dreams the day the snows of the gift had first soaked through Jon's boots and found his toes. He had woken then, knowing the taste of old iron in his mouth, and now here it was, and the taste was real. Blood, the stale old breath of a city that had been a dragon's hearth. She lay where he had laid her, a curl of hair stuck damp to her temple. He had smoothed her eyelids shut with 2 fingers. He had whispered the words that came to him, the old words, the ones the free folk used for the dead because they were the only honest words he had ever learned for death. Go well and go warm. He had waited long enough for the sound of wings to fill the world. When the shadow passed, the light went out of the room altogether. The great beast had not burned him, had not burned the chair of swords, had not burned anything but the air itself, as if its grief could do no less than sear what could not be mended. Then dragon and queen were gone into the day, a black stroke across the pale sky that made watchers at the windows fall to their knees. Jon stood a time without measure, not looking at the chair. When he finally looked, he could not think of it as a chair. It was a heap of blades hammered by pride and ambition into a monument for a man who had never learned how to keep what he took. He did not think of Ares or of Robert or of any boy who had grown into a ruin while sitting on those spikes. He thought of Maester Aemon's soft, reedy voice. Love is the death of duty. And then later, in the cold and the dark, when another voice had spoken in him as if from the old roots under the wall. Duty is the death of love. Footsteps came at last behind him, fast, hard-souled, echoing. Ghost's ears flicked forward. The dire wolf did not growl. Jon did not need to look to know the stride. Tyrion Lannister entered with a guard of Unsullied behind him and looked at the body on the floor with a face that seemed to have taken a blow from an invisible hand. For a moment the Lannister's mouth shaped a word that did not come. Then he looked at the chair and then at Jon, and any words he might have had fled from him as if they too felt the heat lingering in the room. Grey Worm stood beyond Tyrion, his face a mask that did not show enough to be called anger. The point of his spear bobbed once, minutely. Behind him, unsmiling men with shaved heads and perfect posture waited for an order. The room might as well have been a board with only a few pieces left on it. Each one moved to its limit, one final rank between check and mate. Jon did not think of the game. He thought of Ghost's warmth against his leg. "Your queen," Grey Worm said. "Dead," Jon answered. The word sat in his chest like a stone and would not move. "The dragon took her." "By whose hand?" "I told her the truth," Jon said. And the truth was that the truth had cut her in a place that no blade could find. "Then I did what I had to do." Grey Worm's eyes did not flicker. "Bring him," he said to his soldiers. Then, to Tyrion, in the same voice, the one that gave orders and did not ask, "You too." Ghost moved as the Unsullied did. No warning in the smooth, ghost-pale stride. But the men stopped when he came to stand with his shoulder bone pressing against Jon's knee and his head framed by Jon's hip. The wolf's lips were parted just enough to show the whitest edge of a canine. No sound, only the knowledge of what would come if a spear came down. "Do not," Tyrion said softly. "They will die, and then we will die, and the piles in this city will be taller yet." "They have killed more than enough already," Jon said, and in that moment he did feel something that might have been anger wearing the shape of weariness. Grey Worm studied him. "There will be a reckoning," he said. "There must be," Jon said. They brought him down to a room below the old kitchens. Tyrion walked beside him. Ghost came at his left, as he had in snow and forest and the narrow places of shattered castles. Here even the Unsullied parted for him. The smell of spilled soup and smoke lived in the stone. In the corridors, men and women went past with arms full of linens or jars or anything else not broken by fire. No one met Jon's eyes long. Some turned away with the quickness of those who have learned that to be seen is to be named and to be named is to be counted. The cell had no straw in it. Ghost circled twice and lay down, filling the corner with fur and steady breath. Jon knelt beside him and dug his fingers into the coarse scruff behind the ears, pulling until the skin bunched. He did not speak. Ghost's heart beat against Jon's palm, slow, strong. A drum you could march to across the whole of the north. "You have the oddest company for a would-be king," Tyrion said from where the Unsullied had left him leaning against the wall. "I am no," Jon began, but the word lodged and would not move. He had been a steward, a lord commander, a bastard, a brother. He had been something else too. For a little time on a cold slab with knives in him and Melisandre's song in the room. He had never been a king. "They will not hurt him," Tyrion said, nodding at Ghost. "They will try," Jon said. It was near dark when footsteps came again. Davos Seaworth slipped in after the Unsullied, a shadow carrying a sailor's gait, head low as if the beam above the door would surely crack him if he gave it the chance. He looked from Jon to Tyrion to Ghost and did his reckoning. "The city's in a fever," he said without preamble. "Half want the Unsullied to clear out, and the other half want to climb into their shirts for safety." "What of the north?" Jon asked. "They're at the gates," Davos said. "Lady Sansa's come down as far as the Rosby Road with the Manderleys and the Glover men. The Ares riders are in sight of the city with Bronze Yone. Edmure Tully's setting up his banners on the hill before the Dragon Pit. Gendry's got a forge going on the King's Road for the Stormlands men he could scrape together. There's talk of a council. Someone's got to decide what happens before the Unsullied start deciding it for everyone. And Grey Worm, he wants justice," Davos said. "Only he thinks justice looks like your head on a spike and Tyrion's beside it." "The new way of doing things has an old look," Tyrion murmured. "What do we do when the men with spears want a thing and the men with banners want another?" "We keep the peace long enough to talk," Davos said. "And we talk fast." The door opened again and another shape came in that made the air change. Bran arrived not so much as walking as being brought by the motion of his chair and the strong backs behind it. Arya walked in behind him, lean and watchful as a cat that had never been tamed, though she sent Ghost a quick curve of the mouth when the wolf stirred. Sansa came last, in plain gray under her cloak, the hood unpinned at her throat but left to lie on her shoulders. They all fit the cell as if the cell had grown around them. Sansa's eyes found Jon's. He saw winter roads in them, and a kitchen fire under a cavernous roof, and a hand he remembered gripping a cup until the knuckles were white because it was the only warmth in the room. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No." Arya went to Ghost first, squatting to press her brow to the direwolf's for a heartbeat as if greeting a brother. Then she stood and regarded Jon as she might regard a map. "They won't let you leave this room unless we make them," she said. "I left the room above without anyone making me," Jon said. "That was different," Arya said, and her eyes flicked once in the direction of the ceiling and what had lain on it. Bran said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was a bird's feather falling onto a drum. "The realm is a cart pulled by hungry horses," he said. "It will go where the strongest pulls." "Bran," Sansa said, and the name held all the longliness of years and the sternness of a woman who had made herself steel and would not unmake. "You saw this." "I saw fires," Bran said, "and I saw a throne made of the weapons of defeated men, and I saw a wolf with the eyes of winter. I saw a boy who should have died and did not, who learned that death cannot be paid back, only paid forward. I saw a crown no one would be wise to wear. I saw you all again and again, until I could not tell whether it was remembering or foretelling." Sansa drew a breath. "We are calling a council," she said to Jon. They'll meet at the dragon pit at dawn. The Unsullied will come because they think they can choose the end of this story. The Lords will come because they think they can. You'll come because if you don't, someone else will choose for you." Jon stroked Ghost's neck and stood. "I killed her," he said. "We know," Arya said. "And you will answer for what you've done," Sansa said. "And for what you have not done. We all will. But first, we have to keep what remains of the realm from splitting like rotten wood." Tyrion lifted his head. "You will not accept the crown in my stead?" he asked Jon softly. "If it is offered, there is no crown," Jon said, though he knew there were many, and each one a set of invisible chains. "There is duty," Davos put in. "All I can tell you, lad, is that every time I've turned my back on duty, it's run up behind me and kicked me in the arse. So I started facing it, and we've learned to nod to each other." At dawn, the dragon pit stood open to the wind. The sky was a pale bowl full of thin clouds, and seabirds wheeled and cried on currents rising from the Blackwater. The city crouched below it like a beaten dog, but even beaten dogs watched the hand that fed them and remembered who had hit them last. The ash had settled in the streets, and men had begun sweeping it into piles. A child dragged a charred banner by its pole, not playing at anything, just moving it because it had to be moved. They brought Jon up under the eye of 100 spears. The Unsullied formed a perfect half-circle along the rim of the broken amphitheater, as if a sculptor had set them there. Behind them stood Dothraki riders who had survived the night, their horses restless on trampled grass, the men's braid bells silent in the morning air. On the opposite side rose the lords and ladies who had hurried to the city's new gravity. Bronze Yohn Royce, his beard a storm cloud. Robin Arryn pale as milk and little collected, though he tried to stand tall. Edmure Tully fussing with the knot at his collar. Gendry with a hammer hung from his hip like an oath. Yara Greyjoy with the sea in her stance and a face that would have smiled if it had seen blood. The Prince of Dorne dark, lean, with the unhurried stillness of a man to whom heat is an old friend. A Hightower man with the keys of Old Town worked in silver at his girdle. A Westerland's castellan who had the look of a man who had not expected to be the one to speak for his lion house and did not relish it. Men from the Riverlands who remembered twins and violins and red weddings. A few reach lords who had watched a garden burn and learned the taste of ash in their wine. Men of the Stormlands who had hammered their own armor after finding the old suits fit ghosts. Sansa came up with the northern men, and when she stood at the lip of the pit, what noise there was drained away. Arya stood half behind Jon's shoulder, where a space always seemed to open for her. Bran was set where the wind moved his hair like grass, his hands folded. Davos stood at Jon's other side with the steadiness of a well-laid keel. Tyrion, unguarded now but far from free, kept to the edge, a man who had taken the measure of a dozen blades and knew which would be the first to swing. Grey Worm walked to the open center and set his spear but heavily on the earth. "The Dragon Queen is dead," he said in the old tongue of Astapor, and then again in the common because he was a soldier who understood what words could do. "She was murdered by this man." He pointed, not dramatically but with exactness, to Jon. "He must die." "The queen was not a queen of this city," Yara said in a voice that carried, sharp as gull's wings. "But she was my ally. She gave me back my islands from my uncle's filthy hands. I say what the soldier says. Blood for blood." "Blood is easy," Davos said. "Bread is not. Bread is for women's hands," a Dothraki called from his saddle, smiling with his teeth. "And who will bake for you when all the women are dead?" Arya asked, and the rider's smile twitched and then was gone. Bronze Yohn lifted an open hand, a man long used to settling disputes between farmers and shepherds that turned on whose lamb had strayed where. "We can talk of bread and blood both," he said. "But if we are to set one kingdom or 6 or 7 upon its feet again, we must first agree whose word will carry." Edmure cleared his throat and took a step forward. "As the most experienced among us in matters of administration," he began, "and with a thorough understanding of—" "Sit down, uncle," Sansa said without looking at him, and Edmure's mouth opened and shut and he stepped back, easing his sword dignity as if he had been pushed into a chair. The Prince of Dorne stepped into the center. He had the air of a man listening to a voice only he could hear. "We have had kings by right of blood who bled the realm," he said. "We have had kings by right of war who bled it differently. We have had councils that chose and councils that squealed, and in the end one sword or another did the choosing for them. This is the truth you all know. The question before us is not who should sit the throne because a father was this or that, or because a storm blessed his birth, or because his sword arm is strong. The question is who will be obeyed when he speaks, and who will bend not because he is feared, but because the realm itself feels safer when he holds the reins." "Pretty words," said the Westerlands man hoarsely. "But the gold's all gone and the small folk are hungry and my lord is dead. We need a king who can make bakers bake and smiths smith and ships come with grain." Tyrion stepped forward, and all eyes went to him because he had been the mouth of a dragon, and mouths that have breathed fire are remembered. "Kings," he said, "are stories men tell themselves to sleep at night. The story of Daenerys Targaryen was that she would break the wheel and free the world of tyrants. You have seen how that story ends when it is not bounded by the small decencies. The story of Cersei Lannister was that she would keep her children safe. You know how that ended. The story of Jon Snow," he paused and looked to Jon, "is that he never wanted a crown and would yet take every hurt the realm can give him to keep a child alive who belongs to no one. I say we set the realm into the hands of the only man I have seen who throws away honor when it gets in the way of what is right and throws away what is right when it gets in the way of mercy. He is a bastard in name and a king in all but name." "Who is he?" the Hightower man asked, and there was a whisper in him that had not been there before, a scholar's curiosity, the dangerous desire to have the proper label for a thing and then behave as if the label was the thing itself. Bran's eyes moved. "He is Aegon Targaryen," he said. No flourish. "Son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. Born in the Tower of Joy, married in secret. His line is older than any of us here by law. I know it. Samwell Tarly has seen it in a record a maester forgot to keep from daylight. Ask him and he will quote you the page." "Samwell," Gendry said, startled into the syllables, and then an odd, crooked grin, as if he had remembered the boy with the sword who had hidden behind heavier men on the fist and somehow lived. "He's with me," Davos said, "in the city. He brought books out of the citadel the way a smuggler brings onions." The murmuring rose like wind in pine trees. Yara's mouth had become a line a rope would envy. Grey Worm's eyes moved at last, a faint narrowing. The Dothraki man laughed once, short and bright, a blade on stone. The Prince of Dorne inclined his head the smallest fraction. "Blood again," he said. "Not only blood," Sansa said, stepping into the circle so that the wind plucked at the fur on her collar and made it twitch like ghosts' hackles. "The North will not bend the knee again. I will not. We remember what oaths cost and what they bought us, and I was there when it was nothing but pain. But we will not take up arms against our brother if he keeps his word as he kept it in Winterfell and on the field and in the night. Let the South mend itself with him at its head, if that is what you choose. We will stand beside it, not under it." A sound went through the pit at that. Disappointment in some, relief in others, confusion in a few who had not yet learned that a kingdom could be both near and not theirs. Bronze Yohn nodded once, heavy. Robin Arryn looked from Sansa to Jon like a boy asked to choose between two sweets. Arya watched with the impassive curiosity of a blade on a whetstone. All eyes turned again to Jon. He had not wanted it before, and he did not want it now, and the wanting of it by others weighed more than any desire in him could hope to. Ghost pressed against his leg in that old, familiar way that said we are two branches of the same tree. Jon looked at Grey Worm. "If I live," he said, "it is because you allow it." Grey Worm did not blink. "If you live," he said, "it is because you are meant to answer for what you did." "Then I will answer," Jon said, "before lords and small folk alike. I will say what I did and why. If they find me guilty, I will die. If they forgive me, I will live. But one way or another, this city and this realm must be made to stand. I have kept the watch. I have taken vows no boy should have to take. I know how to hold a line when the dark is moving. If you choose me, I will be king of the 6 kingdoms and a shield to the 7th. If you do not, then choose someone else you will obey. Choose now." Silence held. When the sound came, it was little, a throat clearing, a banner catching, a leaf turning. Bronze Yohn raised his hand. "The Vale votes for Jon Snow," he said. Gendry banged his hand against the head of his hammer. "Storm's End for Jon Snow." The Prince of Dorne tilted his head, as if receiving counsel from the sun itself. "Dorne for Jon Snow." The Hightower man hesitated a heartbeat and then said, "Old Town for Jon Snow." Yara Greyjoy's jaw worked. At last she spat to the side. "The Iron Islands will have no lord but their own," she said. "But we will not fight you if you keep your oaths. I will not kneel." "That is what you promised the dragon," Davos said, not unkindly. "And look how that turned out." Yara looked at him as if measuring him for a hook, then shrugged a sailor's shrug. "We will see," she said. The Westerland's castellan spread his hands. "We are leaderless," he said, "but we can count. If there is to be a king, better one with no love for our house than one with our gold in his eye." The Westerlands for Jon Snow. Edmure Tully, looking as if he had swallowed a stone, managed. "The Riverlands for Jon Snow." Robin Arryn flushed scarlet and stammered, "The Vale," and then realized it had been said and nodded, chastened. Tyrion did not speak for a house. He said only softly, "The city needs a name to pray to." Grey Worm watched it all with the attention of a man used to weighing corridors and kill zones. At last he took a step back and inclined his head, a movement so small it might almost not have happened. "If you are king," he said, "then you will set the punishment for the queen's death." Jon met his eyes. "No," he said. "The punishment will be set by the law in front of everyone. It will be for the realm to see how justice is done from this day. No more burnings. No more secrets." The choice had been made in the heartbeats, as many choices are, but now it was given words, and with the words came weight. The wind seemed to lift, as if some great creature had exhaled and the air could move again. Men in both halves of the amphitheater began to speak at once and then check themselves. A dozen ravens leapt from a broken pillar where they had been perching and went to wing black notes across the pale sky. The coronation was no clever thing. Jon refused the crown that had been carried up from whatever chest had hidden it from Dragonfire, a circle of black iron set with rough garnets no jeweler would have praised. He put no rich cloth on his shoulders. He stood in the dragon pit with the ash brushing his boots and let Davos lift a hand that shook only a little and say the words that would be remembered longer than either man would live. Jon took no oaths from the lords about to be his vassals. He gave them instead and asked their names in return. When the word came to kneel, fewer men did than in happier times, and those who did not looked him full in the face so that their refusal was its own sort of fealty. Ghost sat beside him, and the lords who came close enough to see the pink scars in the wolf's ear and the flecks of old sap in his coat and smelled the clean, wild scent of him felt something like the memory of a tree line at night. Some of them did not sleep well thereafter, and some slept better than they had in years. He moved into the Red Keep because kings had always moved into the Red Keep, and to refuse it would be to say that the old ways mattered more than the hungry in the streets. He slept on a soldier's pallet in a small chamber while workmen dragged smashed furniture from the royal apartments and threw it over the walls. Ghost took the pallet too and made it smaller with one casual sprawl, and the king learned to sleep with one hip on stone. The first council sat at a table with one leg shorter than the others. Davos kept a wedge of folded leather beneath it and kicked it with the toe of his boot when the wobbling threatened to unsettle men about matters that needed no help being unsettled. Samwell came in with a satchel of cracked books and a face that had not yet decided whether to be joyous or terrified. Tyrion took a chair without asking and then half rose, as if expecting to be struck. When no one struck him, he sat fully and regarded his empty palms. Brienne of Tarth came in with Oathkeeper on her hip and a manner unchanged by the evident ruin around her, as if the world had always been like this and would always be like this and she would always be as she was, standing between and taking the blow meant for someone else. Gendry shifted his weight with a smith's habit, as if a hammer hung always from one side would keep a man from standing truly level. The The Hightower man had a different name now, Lord Hightower, until the cousin whose death in a crush at the city gates could be tallied properly. The Prince of Dorne came when he pleased and left when he was done, and while he was there the room felt warmer by a few degrees. Yara did not come. The Hound did not come, though a rumor went around the kitchens that a big man with a face like a war had been seen at night bringing sacks of grain out of nowhere and stacking them near the soup cauldrons, and no one asked questions in a hungry city. They had no gold. That was the first truth, and it sat like an ugly child in a corner and made faces. They sent a raven to the Iron Bank with a note that had nothing in it but the list of names of men who owed their lives to Jon Snow, and the Iron Bank sent back a neat letter saying that sentiment was not a currency the bank had yet learned to accept. Tyrion looked at the letter and smiled without mirth. "They will lend when they think the investment will return," he said. "We must convince them that the realm will be real again before they will lend us coin to make it so." "Get ships," Jon said. "Grain from the Reach. Fish from the Arbor. The Vale has grain too. Buy it or beg it. If the bank will not give us silver, we'll give our word and names instead." "My king," Gendry said, the title still strange and feeling a little foolish in his mouth. "The roads are full of bandits that used to be soldiers. I can get carts built and wheels fixed, but if we don't clean the roads, we'll be making wagons for wolves." "Wolves don't rob," Arya said. "Men do," Gendry said, "and they've learned there's always another lord spitting a speech over a ditch full of bones promising to do better. They'll keep their spears until they believe." "We must feed them to teach them to believe," Davos said, "and we must make them work to feed themselves." Brienne rested her gauntlets on the table, palms down. "We need order, not cruelty. The city has seen too much cruelty." "The city," Tyrion said, "has an appetite for spectacle. If we cannot give them lions eating maidens, we must give them laws that look like lions from a certain distance." So they wrote laws. They did not change everything. The world does not answer all at once to a pen. But they made some things beyond arguing. No burning alive, not by men who loved kings or by kings who loved their will. No taking children as hostages for debts that could not be paid. No pressing men into service without coin or food for their families. A tithe made upon lords of the crownlands to build public ovens and pay bakers to turn the flour that would come downriver into bread the poor could buy for copper rather than blood. Tyrion wrote in clauses that would make future lawyers feel clever. Davos crossed them out with his finger and said, "Thanks, but we are not building boats. We are keeping them from sinking." The trial took place in the very yard where heads had once been set upon spikes like onions on a peddler's stick. Jon asked for no sword and wore no cloak more fine than any guard on the wall. He walked in with Ghost and looked at Grey Worm, and for a moment the whole of the city held its breath to see whether the soldier would call for spears. Grey Worm stood with his hands at his sides and his jaw clenched until it seemed his teeth might crack. He nodded once. Jon told the truth. He said what he had done and why he had done it. He did not ask to be forgiven. He did not say that any would have done what he had done. He spoke of the bells and the scorch and the look in a queen's eyes that had always been full of heat and had at the end become something else. He spoke of the day he had taken vows with his brothers in the snow and learned that your breath can still steam in the cold after you have said words that will set it forever apart. He spoke of a red woman and a god that might have been only a word men had sharpened to cut what stood in their way. He did not say he was a king because he was not then, and he would not be if they did not say he was. When he had done, the murmur went through the yard again like a flurry of wings, and at the front of the press, a washerwoman with a scar under her eye like a faded tear said, almost conversationally, "Let him live. I've lost enough sons to proud men's errors." It should not have mattered more than any other voice, but it did because it was a voice that had learned the taste of ashes and gone on speaking anyway. Others took it up, and though there were cries for blood too, they were fewer, and most came from men who had lost their faces to war and found that a cause makes a mask that will do until real flesh grows back. Grey Worm spoke when all the noise had done its turn. "It is not the justice we were taught," he said, in a voice that made men remember, if only for a heartbeat, the boy who had once been a boy behind that steady face. "But it is the justice the city will have." He did not kneel. He did not smile. He did not shake Jon's hand. He turned and gave orders, and within a fortnight the Unsullied were on ships bound for Noth, carrying with them a promise from the crown that no Westerosi ship bearing arms would sail within sight of those shores. A month after that, a raven came with a feather tied in its leg that had belonged to a bird only Noth sees, and Davos set it on the table like a reliquary and did not touch it thereafter. The Dothraki left in smaller bands, which was worse for the roads but better for the city. Jon set riders from the Vale on the King's Road with purses to pay for horses and blades from men, who would turn them in for enough coin to keep their children through the winter. Not all did, but enough that the King's Road became again what it had been meant to be, a way to somewhere rather than an end. With order came the taxes, and with the taxes came the grain, and with the grain came fewer bodies stacked on the river rocks. The bakers cursed and then counted their coin and cursed less. The city guard learned to wear helmets even in the heat because men who go without them after seeing those streets tend to lay their heads down sooner than they should. Jon wrote letters until his hand cramped, and then Sam took the quill and reminded him that a king's word did not become truer because he wrote it himself if the one reading it believed in him. Ravens went to the Iron Bank and to the Arbor and to Sunspear and to Old Town and to Bear Island, because not even a king can write only to those who will make it easy. Most came back with answers. Some did not. He learned where patience worked and where it was a way of telling yourself a gentler story while the harder one played out without you. He had enemies. Men who had backed Cersei and survived came forward with a wary eagerness, like dogs to a new master. Use us and we will prove ourselves. Turn us away and we will bite. He had friends too, though many of them would have laughed to hear themselves called such. Bronze Yohn became a pillar without telling anyone he intended to be one, holding the veil steady while the boy lord learned to keep his knees from knocking. Gendry took men who had forged swords for coin and forged them into smiths who could turn plowshares out of the iron ripped from city gates. Brienne rebuilt the Kingsguard out of men and women whose names no songs had yet learned, but whose steadiness at 2 in the morning mattered more than how they looked on a horse by noon. She took an oath to protect the royal family and managed to make that oath feel less like an old joke and more like a duty again. When she could, she wrote a line in a white book for Jaime Lannister that made even Tyrion look away because his throat had gone too tight to manage words. Sansa returned north with half the northern host and a bond between thrones that was not an oath and not yet a treaty and was instead what it always had been between some people. 2 hands that did not let go even when they went in different directions. She ruled as a woman with a ledger and a wolfskin and a humor drier than last year's bread. She sent south barrels of salt fish and casks of oil when she could, and when she could not she sent a letter that did not apologize and did not explain. Jon sent her ravens with short notes that said, "I miss the snow and I miss our father's words even when he was wrong, and sometimes I wake and think I'm in the Tower of the Hand and reach for ghost and find only stone." She sent back a scrap of birch bark once that had on it only a small, clumsy drawing of a direwolf's ear with a notch in it and a line. "He is fatter now." Jon laughed aloud and then found there was wetness on his face. Arya stayed until the city made her teeth itch and then took a ship from the harbor at the mouth of the Blackwater, its sails patched but sturdy. Jon did not try to stop her. He stood with Ghost at the end of the broken quay and watched the ship become smaller and knew that if the ship went west forever or hit the edge of the world and dropped, she would do it with her mouth curved the way it did when she had done something she had decided she would do. Ghost leaned against his leg and sneezed at the salt. Davos clapped him on the shoulder and said, "She'll go and she'll come again, or she won't. And if she doesn't, it will be because the sea decided it wanted a Stark and took one, and that's a bargain we all make when we drink from it." Bran did not crown him in the old way because Bran was a king of another place now, and the ravens do not wear circlets. But Bran came when he wished and sat in the Godswood that had lived in the Red Keep as a stunted thing and now put new green under the ash as if to prove that there is one right all tyrants fear, the right of trees to keep trying. They spoke without speaking, sometimes, Jon's hands in Ghost's rough and Bran's pale eyes on leaves that had been carved by men who no longer had names. Once Bran said, "You will have to choose whether to fill your hall with men who agree with you or men who will tell you when you are wrong. It is easier to sleep when you do the first." "It is easier to sleep in the snow," Jon said. "Yes," Bran said, "but not for long." Yara sent raiders down the coasts of the Reach, testing the shape of a new world like a tongue testing a new tooth. Jon sent ships after her, not to fight but to outlast. It turned out that the Ironborn did not like having their fires put out again and again by men who did not burn easily, and after a season the raiders had fewer torches in their hands when they went ashore. A year after, Yara came to the city, dirty with travel and furious with herself for coming at all. She sat across the table from Jon and said, "No kings," as if daring him to argue. "No chains," Jon said. She grunted and drank the wine in front of her and grimaced because it was cheap. "You are a dull king," she said. "I hope so," Jon said. He married because a king who does not marry is an argument someone else will make for him. He did not marry for love, because he had learned that love had sharpened one sword and dulled another, and that either way blood had puddled underfoot. He married to stitch torn cloth. After much counsel and more silence, a bride came from Sunspear with armlets that made her skin glow and a patience that did not look like patience until you put a hard thing in front of it and watched it not move. She had a way of listening that made men realize they were boring themselves and stop talking. She did not love him, and he did not ask it of her. She walked with Ghost and learned when to scratch and when to pull and when to step back from the wolf's yellow-toothed yawn. She spoke to Sansa as one queen to another without asking the word, and a little less ice gathered on letters from the north. Tyrion served because he did not know how to stop serving without drinking himself into a closed room. He made mistakes and he made amends, and sometimes he did neither but only sat late at the table with the candles guttering and shuffled papers into piles so that they looked like order. He went to Casterly Rock once and stood at the cliff's edge and peered down into the foam and then came back with sand in his hair and did not speak of it. He took coin from the Iron Bank at last when the bank agreed that stability looked less risky than honest chaos, and he set it to work building things that would last, because one of the few lessons he had kept from his father was that if you are going to lay a stone, lay one that will not slide when you put another on top. A man from the Riverlands tried to kill Jon with a baker's knife one morning in the square where the ovens smoked. He came weeping, his lips moving around a prayer to a queen whose name still meant mother in tongues that were not his. Ghost saw him before the guards did and put him on his back with a shoulder in the man's chest. A quick, undramatic movement that left the knife on the stones and the man's breath tattered. Jon stepped back and did not reach for a blade. He knelt and said to the man quietly, "I did not kill her alone. The world did it with me. If you kill me, will your child be less hungry?" The man sobbed and spat and cursed him in a language Jon did not recognize, and then in the common called him a coward. Jon stood and told the guards to stand the man up and take the knife and let him go. The next day someone painted a dire wolf on a wall with bread in its jaws and a crown hanging from one ear. Children laughed at it. Priests scowled. The paint flaked in the sun. Another appeared a week later and then a third. No one stopped them. Jon did not know whether to be pleased that his city was choosing animals over sigils. They sent men to man the wall again, not to watch for an enemy with blue eyes and shadows for shadows. That enemy was done and in the doing had taught them not to trust too much in endings, but to shepherd the travelers who would always go up and down the world's spine and to give those who did not belong anywhere a place to belong. Sam went north with them for a season and wrote Jon long, rippling letters about snow fleas and ice lights, and then he returned to the city with a baby who had not been his by birth and a wife who had not been his by contract and a confidence that made men who remembered him as a stammer feel how years can make a man out of kindness against all prediction. Winter came for the south when it was ready and left when it was tired. The city did not starve. A plague blew through like a cruel wind and killed 1,000 and then died itself, because cleanliness and bread, it turned out, were defenses men had always had. Men from Volantis came and tried to sell the city on fires that would never go out, and when they were told no, they tried to sell other fires that would cost more but go out slower, and found themselves no more welcome. A priest of the Red God lit a pyre in a side street and drew a crowd and then put his hand in the flames and hissed, and Jon had the flames stamped out and told him that if he wanted to use fire he should do it in the ovens like everyone else and make bread. The priest left, offended. The bread was good, which was the point. Ghost grew grayer about the muzzle and heavier through the chest. He learned the city better than any guard. He knew which stairways the fishmongers took to the river when they wanted to hide part of a catch from the tithe, and he knew which alley took storm water faster than a thief's legs. He slept in front of the nursery when there were children, and when there were none he slept where Jon slept, and made it known that any man who wanted to wake the king at odd hours should consider his own limbs lendable first. He came to recognize Tyrion's particular step and to tolerate Brienne's hand on his head when she was thinking and did not know she had placed it there. Once he stole a pie cooling in a windowsill and ate it behind a buttress, and when the baker came to complain, Jon paid him from his own purse and then walked the route Ghost took every morning and moved 2 windows that had been knocked askew and fixed a hinge that would have let a child fall out onto the roof tiles. The baker came to complain again the next week about men pissing on his door, and the week after that about his mother-in-law's cough. Jon listened and sometimes did something about it and sometimes did not, and sometimes said, "If I come down there and hold the man's cock for him, will he piss straight?" And the baker gaped and stopped complaining for a month because he had not known a king's mouth could make such shape of words. There were moments when the old world tried to snap back like a stretched rope. A knight of the Reach challenged a butcher's son because the son had refused to yield a space in the market and had not known who he was refusing. The knight had not known that the butcher's son had once been a pikeman and that Davos had hired the son to teach other sons to stand steady. The knight went home with a broken nose and a lesson. He wrote a letter to his lord saying the city had lost respect for quality. The lord wrote to Jon saying that if the butcher's sons were to be allowed to break the noses of knights, where would order be? Jon wrote back that order would be where it belonged, in the hands of those who knew what it cost. Tyrion brought him a problem from the Iron Bank one rain-laden afternoon. "They want assurances on the loan," he said. "Land put up as collateral." "Whose?" Jon asked. "Yours, if they can get it." Tyrion's mouth twisted. "Ours, if we are foolish." "There's if they are foolish. They rarely are." "Give them the Dragonstone quarry," Jon said. "And the lease on the Arbor's winter stores for 5 years if the harvests hold. They can have the right to collect from certain tariffs if the city's revenue falls below the mark we set together. And write it so that if they fail to send the grain on the date they promise, they lose twice what they would gain in interest." Tyrion cocked his head. "You are learning to speak their language." "I am learning that words are swords you can put away without anyone bleeding," Jon said. He was not beloved. He did not expect to be. A king who is beloved is usually a king who has not yet had to tell too many truths. He was, however, obeyed more than he was defied, and when he was defied it was by men who came to him openly with their anger rather than skulking, which was a kind of respect larger than any cheer shouted at a parade. He dreamed still of snow, and of halls where fires burned low and steady, and of a woman with silver hair and a voice like a song sung through a flame. He did not wake forgiven, and he did not expect to be. He woke and he fed the wolf and he went to the table. There was a war, because there is always a war somewhere. A remnant of the Golden Company gathering men who liked old names and old pay and knew how to set a field alight so that it burned back toward the farmer rather than away. They came out of the stormlands like stinging rain, burning and then falling back into the trees. The Stormlords bayed for blood. Tyrion wanted to hire their cousins from across the sea and turn their gold against them. A neat solution that would have been clever and quick and would have planted a thorn in the foot that would fester after the boot was off. Davos wanted ships on the coast and signals lit in code only 3 men knew. Brienne wanted an oath sworn and kept. Jon listened. Then he went himself, not because he was a boy who loved a war, but because the men who would have to fight did not love it either and would be steadier if he stood where they stood. Ghost went too. He loped ahead along the edge of the pines and came back when Jon whistled. In the morning the fog sat low over the ferns, and the smell of old leaves was a smell Jon had always found to be clean. They set lines not where the sellswords expected them and set fires not to make a show but to drive the rats from their burrows and into netted places. It took longer than songs tell it and ended uglier. The last of the company died in a ditch with his face in water he had muddied, and when he tried to turn it so he could look at the sky, Ghost put a paw on his shoulder and the man stopped trying, because sometimes dignity is only the knowledge that one has been held down by a worthy hand. Jon did not take heads when he returned. He took oaths instead and took hostages not of blood but of work. Men who had made towns burn were set to putting up houses and hauling timber and working their wrists into steadiness shaping shingles. The first week 3 ran. The second week 5 did not. The third week 1 took a shingle and cut his own throat with it. And Jon ordered that blades be dulled further, and that men who had seen too much killing be given tasks that would make something for a child to lie under in the rain. He placed people like stones along a river to make it fordable. Sam in the citadel as an unwelcome guest of men who thought books should not be opened so quickly. Writing letters at night to men he had seen do brave things with dull tools and reminding them that knowledge is a tool too. Davos over ships and harbors and all things that floated, making deals in low rooms and counting barrels with a faith few men had, because he could smell rot at 10 paces and had lived long enough to know that usually men would let you take it out if you pointed and said gently, "That will kill us come spring." Brienne over the guard and over the oaths. Her presence a wall men wanted to be steadied by and few dared test. Gendry in the forges overseeing not the making of swords, though there were enough of those still, but the making of plows strong enough to turn fields that had grown roots of glass by fire. The Prince of Dorne over nothing official and everything that required a man who could say no to a tempting cruelty and yes to a costly patience. Tyrion over the numbers and the names and the notes that made a city into more than a pile. There came a letter sealed with black wax from the Iron Islands, written in a tight, tidy hand that had traced letters by ship's lantern. "No kings," it said again, being a belief rather than a demand. "We fish and we take and we die. Come take it from us if you can." Jon wrote back that he did not intend to take, and when Yara died years later with a laugh in her throat and sea in her lungs, an Ironborn boy came south wearing a belt set with knives and made his case that his people would follow him if they were allowed to keep their rocks and their pride. Jon set nothing down but this: "Bring grain when you raid, not flame." The boy agreed, not because he liked the rule but because he saw that with it he might keep more of his own alive. Sometimes that is what a king is. A man who shows you the knife you are holding by the blade and waits until you take a better grip. He went north twice a year, no more and no less, and while he was there he walked the godswood in Winterfell and the earth came up through his boots in that way it does only there. He watched Sansa sitting her court and he said nothing, because there was nothing to say except that their father would have been proud and their mother would have found flaws and then set to fixing them with that fierce will she had turned first on a husband and then on a war and then on her own heart. Arya came once, sudden as a kestrel, with a scar new to him and a tale in her mouth she did not tell. She slept 2 nights under the roof and left at dawn without saying farewell, and Jon went down to the yard an hour after she had gone and found Ghost sitting where he had a clear view of the gate, as if the wolf, too, had been watching for a last look. Children grew in the Red Keep. They learned to step over the places where scorch marks still ate the stone like old wounds in a hard man's flesh. They learned their letters not from maesters alone, but from the women who ran the ovens and the men who ran the ships, because letters are not only in books, they are in barrel marks and on ships' manifests and on chalkboards in markets. They learned that the wolf with the torn ear would allow a child to set his cheek against his side and feel what it is to hear a strong heart through fur. They learned that a king can be a man who apologizes to a fishmonger for knocking over a basket with a careless elbow, and then kneels to pick up every fish and put them back with hands that smell of iron and dog. He made mistakes. He let a lord from the Crownlands keep his seat too long because the man had been courteous and careful in speech, and only later learned how the lord let his steward bleed the people on his lands by degrees sly enough to be called thrift. He set a tariff on salt that fed the bank and starved the poor, and then, when the kitchens reported that the soup had grown thin enough to light a candle through, he swallowed pride and lifted the tariff and wrote to the bank and told them they would be repaid by a man's word or not at all. He forgot once that the faith had been burned to the ground and that a city left without its stories will invent worse ones. He called on the maesters to teach reading in the alley schools and did not make space for a singer, and the alley schools filled with boys who could say sums and no girls who could say the names of the stars, until a woman who had been a septa before a queen's green fire turned the September to smoke came and stood in front of him and did not move until he promised that the stories would be told with the numbers. When spring came in his 4th year upon the throne, a sword was found. It was a big, ugly thing, its edge broken in 2 places, the hilt twisted. The man who found it brought it to the Red Keep under a cloth and said it had been in his cellar since the fires, and he did not want it in his house any longer because his wife swore she saw light in the metal at night. Tyrion said gently that men often saw what they wanted to fear. Brienne took the sword in her hands and weighed it. She said nothing. Jon set the sword on a table and looked at it for a long time. It was not a special sword. Or if it was special in ways until then only a few had known. There are pieces of a throne and pieces of grief. Sometimes they look the same. Jon told the man to take coin and buy bread and bring his wife to the ovens where the soup was thick again and have a bowl and tell him whether the salt tasted right. The man cried, which told Jon he had done at least one useful thing that day. The sword went into a chest that did not open often. Ghost slept in front of it a week and then forgot it, the way wolves do not keep museums because nothing that lives wants to live in a room full of reminders of things that do not. When he was older, gray at the temples and with lines at the eyes that no one had thought to see there because the boy he had been seemed always to keep his face in the world like a shield, Jon walked in the dragon pit on a day much like the day he had been made king. The wind was the same, and the sea birds still sketched their old poems on the air, and the city smelled of wet stone and hot iron and fruit gone too long in the sun. Ghost walked with him, slower now, a little stiff after sleep, and when Jon sat on the ragged lip of a broken arch, the direwolf put his head on Jon's knee and did not move. For a long time there was only that, the weight, the steady breath, the shared awareness of the world without the need to agree about it. Bran came and sat in his chair without a sound except the breath of the men who had pushed him there. He did not look like a boy and he did not look like a man. He looked like a tree in a place where trees do not often grow tall. "You could have gone north and disappeared," he said. "I tried to once," Jon said. "The world keeps finding me." "You went east too," Bran said, "and south and west, and you kept returns you did not owe." Jon scratched the soft place under Ghost's jaw and thought of a yard where heads had been, and of a king who had not been and then had been, and of a queen who had been and then had not. "I did as I could," he said. Bran said nothing for a long time. Then, "The realm is quieter. It will never be quiet, but it is quieter. That is the work. That is all the work is." Jon looked at the city. Roofs shone with new tile. The line of the river had fat barges on it, and the coops stacked on decks were noisy with birds. Children ran among the archways, avoiding guards without fear, which was a new thing. The godswood in the Red Keep showed green through a window-sized gap where once there had been only smoke and broken stone. Sansa's most recent letter lay in his pocket, a thin thing that had made him smile. A drawing again, better this time, Ghost's ear perfect in its notch, his eye done with a pressure that had made the ink darker, and under it a wolf with a crown on one ear and bread in its mouth and, an addition this time, a small child's hand print in flour on the paper, pressed there by a niece who had no idea kings were anything but uncles who smelled of dog. He put his hand over the letter as if it were a wound he wanted to keep clean. Ghost sighed and rolled onto his side so that Jon could rub the place on his belly that made him thump his hind leg, slow, as if remembering a rabbit he had once chased and chosen not to catch. A raven cut the sky. It was only a black fleck against pale. Dipped once, twice, and went on. Jon did not think of it as omen. He had learned to take the world as it presented itself when he could, because otherwise a man will starve waiting for a feast. He stood. Ghost stood, slower, and gave himself a shake that sent a spray of dust sparkling in the sun. They walked back toward the Red Keep together. Guards bowed. Children pointed. Somewhere a woman yelled at a man about the price of eels. Someone laughed so hard he could not finish what he was eating. The city breathed. The wind tugged at Jon's hair like a teasing ant. He let it. In the throne room, the melted swords had been left as they were, half nightmare and half lesson. He had sat there only when ceremony demanded it and had found other chairs for other days. Even now, he went no closer than a few paces. Ghost lay down with a sigh large enough to stir the ash that still hid in the cracks. Jon stood and looked and did not think of himself sitting there and did not think of it. The light from the broken roof moved slowly as the day did what days do, and the iron that had been forged out of men's urge to conquer and shaped by one madman's whim gave back a dull shine. It would outlast him. It had already outlasted so many. He did not speak. The words lived in other rooms now, at other tables, and would come when they were needed. He stood a while longer as Ghost slept and the shadows shifted and the city outside went on doing what it had learned to do again. Live. Then he turned, and with the dire wolf at his side, and 100 small matters waiting for him like hungry birds. He went to meet the next hour and the next and the next, which is what kings do when they understand that crowns are made of time.